You probably feel a little guilty about it. The conversation that started as an update about a mutual friend and then somehow became something more. The exchange at work where you and a colleague quietly established, without ever quite saying it explicitly, that a third party is difficult, or unreliable, or not quite what they present themselves to be. The group chat where someone shares information about someone else, and everyone responds with a mixture of interest and something that feels suspiciously like pleasure. Gossip. The word itself carries a moral weight, an implication of something slightly shameful, slightly petty, slightly beneath the person you aspire to be. In most cultures and most contexts, gossiping is officially disapproved of. Parents tell children not to do it. Workplaces have policies against it. Religious traditions across the world treat it as a moral failing, and yet everyone does it, constantly, compulsively, often without quite noticing that it has started. The research suggests that the guilt is misplaced, not because gossip is always benign, it is not, but because the human tendency to talk about other people, to share information about their behavior, their character, their relationships, and their social standing, is not a moral failing dressed up as conversation. It is one of the most important cognitive and social capacities the human species has ever developed. And understanding why it exists, what it does, and why it is so irresistible, reveals something fundamental about how human beings became the kind of creatures they are. Let's begin with a number: 65. In the early 1990s, the anthropologist and evolutionary psychologist Robin Dunbar at the University of Liverpool conducted a series of studies on the content of human conversation. He and his colleagues recorded naturally occurring conversations in public places, universities, restaurants, trains, and social gatherings, and analyzed what people were actually talking about. Across these different settings, across both sexes and different age groups, the pattern was remarkably consistent. Approximately 65% of all human conversation was about social topics, about people, about who is doing what with whom, about relationships and intentions and reputations, about what so-and-so did and what it might mean, and what it reveals about who they really are. 65%. Not ideas. Not politics. Not sports or art or science or the state of the world. People. Specifically, the social lives, behaviors, and characters of people the speakers knew or knew of. Dunbar's response to this finding was not to conclude that human beings are shallow or that intellectual conversation is a rarity. His response was to ask why this particular form of conversation had come to dominate human social life so completely. And the answer he arrived at was one of the most influential ideas in evolutionary psychology of the past 3 decades. To understand Dunbar's argument, you need to understand something about social bonding in primates. Great apes and other primates maintain their social bonds primarily through physical grooming. They pick through each other's fur, removing parasites and debris, spending substantial portions of their day in this activity. And the function of grooming is not primarily hygienic. It is primarily social. Grooming stimulates the release of endorphins in both the groomer and the one being groomed. It produces a calm, pleasurable physiological state that creates and maintains social bonds. The time a primate spends grooming another primate is a measure of the strength of their social relationship. There is a constraint on this system. You can only physically groom one individual at a time. The size of the social group a primate species can maintain through grooming is therefore limited by the amount of time available for grooming. Dunbar had previously documented what became known as Dunbar's number, the relationship between the size of the neocortex relative to the rest of the brain across primate species and the typical size of the social groups those species maintain. For humans, the relevant number is approximately 150, the maximum size of a stable social group that can be maintained through the kind of regular personal contact that characterizes genuine social bonds. But here is the problem. As human ancestors began living in larger and more complex social groups, the time required for physical grooming to maintain all those relationships would have become prohibitive. You cannot spend 60% of your day grooming if you also need to find food, care for children, avoid predators, and everything else that survival requires. Dunbar's hypothesis is that language, and specifically gossip, evolved as a solution to this problem. Vocal grooming. a way of maintaining social bonds across multiple individuals simultaneously, without the time constraints of physical grooming. When you are in a conversation with 3 or 4 other people, sharing and receiving social information, you are in some functional sense grooming all of them at the same time. The endorphin-mediated pleasurable bonding that physical grooming produced has been partially replaced, in humans, by the social pleasure of conversation about other people. This hypothesis, which Dunbar laid out most fully in his 1996 book Grooming, Gossip, and the Evolution of Language, makes a specific and testable prediction. If gossip evolved as a replacement for physical grooming, it should be associated with the same neurochemical mechanisms that underlie the bonding effects of grooming. And the evidence supports this. Research has found that social laughter, one of the most reliably gossip-associated behaviors, produces elevated endorphin levels in participants, as measured by pain tolerance tests, a standard proxy for endorphin activity. The pleasure of shared social information, the specific quality of satisfaction that comes from a good gossip, appears to be at least partially mediated by the same opioid system that mediates the pleasure of physical touch and the runner's high. But Dunbar's grooming hypothesis, compelling as it is, does not capture the full picture of what gossip does and why it is so central to human social life. To understand the rest of the picture, you need to understand what information about other people's behavior actually enables. The anthropologist Christopher Boehm at the University of Southern California has spent decades studying social behavior in hunter-gatherer societies across the world. His central finding, which he developed most fully in his 2012 book Moral Origins, is that gossip is one of the primary mechanisms through which egalitarian hunter-gatherer societies enforce their social norms. Hunter-gatherer societies, Boehm argues, are not simply small groups of people sharing resources. They are systems that actively and deliberately suppress the emergence of dominance hierarchies. Unlike chimpanzees, who live in rigidly hierarchical social structures where dominant males monopolize resources and reproductive opportunities, human hunter-gatherer groups are characterized by what Boehm calls reverse dominance hierarchies, in which the group collectively constrains the behavior of any individual who attempts to accumulate disproportionate power or resources. The mechanisms through which this collective constraint operates are primarily linguistic. Gossip is the central technology. When a hunter returns from a successful hunt, other members of the group do not celebrate his dominance. They talk about him behind his back, criticizing his pride, emphasizing the role of luck, attributing his success to factors beyond his control. This is not mere jealousy or pettiness. It is a sophisticated social technology for preventing the accumulation of status that would allow any individual to dominate the group. The anthropologist Marshall Sahlins called this the original affluent society, a social order in which relative equality is actively maintained through the monitoring and management of individual behavior. Boehm documents the same pattern across dozens of hunter-gatherer societies. Gossip about individuals who are taking more than their share, who are behaving aggressively, who are claiming unwarranted status, serves as a first-line social sanction. It creates reputational costs for norm violations that are often sufficient to bring behavior back into line without the need for direct confrontation. And when gossip proves insufficient, it escalates to open criticism, to ostracism, and in extreme cases, to collective violence against persistent norm violators. The implication is profound. Gossip is not merely a social pleasure or a mechanism for bonding. It is, and has been for most of human evolutionary history, one of the primary enforcement mechanisms of the moral and social order. It is how groups of human beings, without police forces or courts, or formal institutions of any kind, maintain the cooperative social structures that make their survival possible. The evolutionary psychologist Sarah Wert and her colleague Peter Salovey at Yale have developed what they call the social comparison function of gossip, of documenting how gossip serves the specific psychological function of enabling people to locate themselves within their social world. Information about how other people are behaving, what they are achieving, how they are regarded by others, is essential for the calibration of one's own social behavior and expectations. This is why gossip tends to be about people who are relevant to the gossiper's own social world and social standing. You gossip about people you know or might know, people whose behavior has potential implications for your own situation, people whose reputations have bearing on the social norms of your community. Gossip about distant celebrities or historical figures has a different quality from gossip about people in your actual social network, because only the latter has direct implications for your own position and behavior. The psychologist Robb Willer at Stanford has conducted research on what he calls prosocial gossip, the specific form of gossip in which people share negative information about others who have violated social norms. Willer and his colleagues found that people experience measurable physiological distress when they witness someone behaving in a norm-violating way and are unable to warn others about it. The urge to share reputational information about norm violators is not merely a desire for entertainment or social bonding. It is associated with genuine moral distress when suppressed, and with genuine relief when expressed. Gossip, in this function, is the expression of a moral emotion. Willer's research also found that the recipients of prosocial gossip benefit from it. People who received warnings about potential norm violators in a simulated social exchange game were able to avoid exploitation and make better social decisions. The information value of reputational gossip is real and consequential. Knowing what someone is really like, as opposed to how they present themselves, is genuinely useful social information that protects individuals from exploitation and helps communities maintain cooperative norms. The flip side of this is the potential for gossip to be weaponized. If gossip is a primary mechanism for managing reputations and social status, then false or strategically distorted gossip becomes a form of social attack. The deliberate spreading of damaging information, whether accurate or not, can be used to destroy reputations, exclude individuals from social networks, and inflict serious harm. The same mechanisms that make gossip a powerful tool for social norm enforcement make it a powerful weapon in interpersonal and intergroup conflict. The psychologist Jennifer Bosson at the University of South Florida has documented what she calls the bonding function of negative gossip, the specific way in which sharing negative information about a third party creates intimacy and trust between the participants in the exchange. When you tell someone something negative about a third party, you are implicitly signaling that you trust them with sensitive information, that you regard them as an ally rather than a potential supporter of the target, and that you are inviting them into a coalition defined partly by its shared assessment of the absent party. The recipient of this information who accepts it is accepting not just the information, but the social alignment it implies. This is why gossip can feel so bonding, and why the absence of gossip can sometimes be a marker of social distance. The person who never gossips with you, who always maintains a careful neutrality about third parties, may be signaling that they do not trust you sufficiently to share their actual assessments of the people around them. The exchange of social information functions as a form of intimacy, a sharing of one's actual view of the social world, rather than the performed version appropriate for more formal contexts. The cognitive demands of social information processing, of the kind that gossip requires, are substantial. Tracking the relationships, intentions, behaviors, and reputations of dozens or hundreds of individuals in a social network, maintaining a model of who knows what about whom, updating that model as new information arrives, calibrating one's own behavior and communication based on that model. All of this requires considerable cognitive resources. The psychologist Nicholas Epley at the University of Chicago has argued that the human capacity for social cognition, for understanding and predicting the behavior of other people, is one of the most computationally demanding things the human brain does, and gossip is one of the primary exercises through which this capacity is developed, maintained, and deployed. This may help explain why the topics that dominate gossip, social relationships, intentions, moral judgments, questions of character and reliability and trustworthiness, are also the topics that dominate human fiction, from ancient oral storytelling through to the contemporary novel and television drama. The psychological mechanisms that process gossip, that find it engaging and motivating and emotionally involving, are the same mechanisms that process narrative fiction about human social life. Both are fundamentally exercises in social cognition, in the modeling and evaluation of human character and relationship. The novelist Ian McEwan has observed that almost all of what makes a novel interesting is gossip. What the characters are doing, what they think about each other, who knows what about whom, who is deceiving whom, what it all reveals about who these people really are. The formal sophistication of the novel is largely in service of what is, at its core, extended gossip about fictional people. What does all of this mean for how you think about your own gossiping? The first thing it means is that the guilt, while understandable, is not entirely warranted. The tendency to talk about other people, to share social information, to process and evaluate the behavior and character of the people in your social world is not a moral weakness. It is one of the capacities that defines you as a human being. It is how you maintain social bonds, how you calibrate your position in your social world, how you contribute to the maintenance of social norms, how you protect yourself and others from exploitation, and how you exercise and develop the social cognitive capacities that are among the most distinctive and most valuable things about the human mind. The second thing it means is that the question is not whether to gossip, but how. Gossip that shares accurate information about genuine norm violations, that warns others about real risks, that maintains rather than distorts the social record, is doing genuine social work. Gossip that is deliberately false, that distorts for strategic purposes, that is aimed at destruction rather than at social norm maintenance, is a different thing entirely. The difference matters, and it is worth noticing which kind you are doing. The third thing it means is that when you feel that particular pull of interest in what someone else is doing, what their behavior reveals about their character, what the social situation really is beneath its surface, you are not being shallow, you are being human, in exactly the way that human beings have always been human, using the same cognitive machinery that built language, that built moral communities, that built the cooperative social structures, that made everything else possible. 65% of everything we say is about other people. It always has been. And the world it built is the one you live in. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. If you find this video interesting, please consider subscribe for more content like this.